I'm going to be giving a brief presentation today on project stakeholder management, identification, categorization, and engagement in food manufacturing environments. This will be a general presentation, high level, about project stakeholder management, but I'm going to give some specific examples that relate to food manufacturing environments because those are the types of projects that I work on currently. So identification of project stakeholders. What is a project stakeholder? Who is a stakeholder? Why is it important to identify key project stakeholders? And how can stakeholder engagement help shift project trajectories and ensure project success? So what is a project stakeholder? We can think of any groups or individuals who will be affected by a given project's outcomes. This is typically someone who has a direct interest in the project, someone who might affect or be affected by the outcome of a project, product, or portfolio. Something to remember is that stakeholders are different from shareholders. Shareholder is typically someone who has a financial investment in the project, and stakeholders do not have that financial investment, so a key differentiation there. Some example of stakeholders in a typical project, which I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide: suppliers and contractors, customers, managers, and of course, employees. How do we identify these groups and individuals that will be impacted by the project? We would consider potential stakeholders when gathering information in the exploratory phase of the project. So thinking early on when we are building business case or developing those project management documents, we're going to start to investigate who would be impacted by this project. They're going to be our stakeholders. We want to identify them early on to make sure that as the project develops, we're considering those stakeholders, taking them into consideration to prevent any issues or negative risk as the project progresses. So a little more on identification of project stakeholders, thinking specifically about food manufacturing environments. Our internal stakeholders, like our company employees, so those would be our project team members, of course, our representatives from marketing, R&D, operations, supply chain, our project manager, and then also our sales and marketing teams, so maybe not directly involved in the project, but heavily impacted by the project outcomes. Additionally, we think about our external stakeholders, so not within the company, but outside of the company, thinking our customers like grocery stores and distributors, suppliers who provide our packaging and raw materials, government entities, so really significant part of food manufacturing from a compliance standpoint. They would be our regulatory bodies like USDA or FDA, and then of course our business partners, so thinking maybe some co-manufacturers who are helping produce our product. We're absolutely going to be impacted by the project outcomes. Something really significant to making sure that a project is successful is categorizing the project stakeholders once they've been identified. I'm going to talk about a couple of systems here. First would be our 2-dimension and 3-dimension mapping system. So these systems help us understand the relationship between power, interest, and attitude towards a project by our stakeholders, and will help us determine how significant a stakeholder might be to a project outcome. Helps us understand the influence of each stakeholder on the project, which can in turn help us limit disruptions that might cause delays or issues to our project objectives. Our stakeholder mapping data can also help drive effective communication with those stakeholders. So a couple of different purposes here. Categorization of stakeholders can help us manage potential risk. So for example, a stakeholder with a high level of power and a high interest in a project outcome may create issues and some negative risk if not managed well. So we want to make sure that when we identify a really significant stakeholder, that our communication with them and the way that we interact with them as the project moves forward is appropriate. So another system for categorizing project stakeholders is the salience model. This model analyzes or assesses stakeholders using urgency, legitimacy, and power as the categorization system. So the authority of a stakeholder translates to power, the immediate needs of a stakeholder translates to urgency, and then the appropriateness or involvement of a stakeholder translates to legitimacy. So another system that allows us to prioritize and categorize those stakeholders to ensure that we're giving them the correct amount of attention, that our communication with them is effective and appropriate, and basically to limit any future risk or issues with that stakeholder. Engagement of project stakeholders. So engaging stakeholders through communication and involvement builds trust and understanding. Interviewing stakeholders can provide valuable information to drive project development, and stakeholders can help shape project vision and objectives. Ultimately, gathering data and information from those stakeholders can help shape our project, make it more effective, and help our objectives and goals feel appropriate for a given community and environment. So in summary, understanding the why of project stakeholder engagement. We want to identify significant stakeholders who may have influence over project outcomes. We want to make sure that our project is successful. So by identifying stakeholders that may be able to influence a project, we're hoping that influence would benefit the project rather than hinder or create issues. Garnering support for the project from stakeholders such as regulatory bodies and community groups can ultimately help us be successful. And then overall, we're trying to reduce or eliminate any negative risk that would cause issues or potentially limit our completion of the project.